district's strategic priorities that would allow us to make sure that we're on the path to a comeback in our downtown area, as well as investing in our people and growing our city. So with that, these guys will take all the tough questions. Questions? Sam?
Yes, Mayor, I noticed that the buses didn't come up. Obviously, the council had asked for free bus service in D.C. Could you talk about that and the fact that you're cutting, I understand, circulator buses in half?
Yes, so we recognize that there is going to be a continued discussion over the district's investment in transit. The council advanced a bill late last year to make Metro bus free, and we expect, based on what they've said, that they will continue to work through the budget process to do exactly that. I have issued some cautionary remarks about that. Number one, and I've asked the CFO to update his analysis, because I think there's been some new information presented since the council took that emergency vote back in December. So I think it's important for the council members to carefully consider the cost. What it would cost to provide free Metro bus in the district, not just this year, but throughout the financial plan. What does it mean for the existing Kids Ride Free program? I have to admit, when this was discussed by the council in December, I thought that the free bus would offset Kids Ride Free and not be additive to the $26 million we already spend on Kids Ride Free. So I think there needs to be some confirmation around how those programs interact. We also know that Metro is planning to introduce a region-wide reduced fare program for low-income residents across the region. So how does that interact? And the requirement, which was not considered in the December vote, was free Metro access. Right. So taking all that together, I hope that the council proceeds with all of the up-to-date cost information. What you will see in my budget proposal is we don't make huge new program investments. And that is the context that we entered this budget year in, and that I hope continues throughout the discussion. We also, because we're having this transit discussion, look very closely at our costs for the DC circulator, the ridership of the DC circulator, and how it fits into the larger transit discussion, and made the decision to recommend eliminating three of the 6 routes.
Why is that?
I just said.
I'm saying, why are you eliminating 3 of the routes?
I just explained.
Can you
that.
Explain again?
Well, I could, Sam, but it may be helpful. Kevin, why don't you just walk through again the kind of the transit decisions that we need to make?
Thank you. So when we looked at the issue, we did look at throughout the budget where are there opportunities to be able to reallocate funding where the funding may not be getting the return that would justify keeping it. So I worked at the DC Department of Transportation 20 years ago when the circulator service started. The original line was Union Station to Georgetown, which is one of the 3 lines that will still be in place. Running a bus service is a much less expensive endeavor than it is now. So now we have a third-party company that provides the management of the service. The labor costs have increased substantially. And because of the need for electrification, if you run a bus service, you also have to buy electric buses. You have to have charging stations. You have to change how you do maintenance. So keeping the 6 routes, expanding it, which had been a discussion as well, would have required us to add substantial amounts to our recurring budget to cover the operating cost annually. And we also would have had to put over $100 million into the capital budget to make sure we built out the electrification infrastructure and the maintenance infrastructure to be able to sustain the program. We looked at all of that, tens of millions more annually for operating, over $100 million in capital, knowing that many of the routes have relatively low ridership compared to WMATA bus routes. The decision was made to reduce 3 of the routes.
Mr. City Administrator, can I follow up on that and just ask, will any of the current employees with the circulator lose their jobs because of these cuts?
I don't know enough about the bench depth of the existing operation to know the ripple effect it will have on filled positions.
Well, are those DC government employees or are those?
They're not DC government employees.
So it is possible people are going to lose their jobs because of these budget cuts.
It is possible, but WMATA, probably the most in-demand profession to have right now is a licensed CDL driver. WMATA has an enormous number of vacancies for bus drivers. So to the extent that there are losses of filled positions, there's also many opportunities, including at WMATA, to be able to pick them up.
Madam Mayor, I'm wondering about the DC Crime Lab. Seeing in the budget that slashing staff at the lab by more than 58%, transferring 82 FTEs from crime sciences to DC Police, and 31 FTEs to the Public Health Crime Lab. I understand, obviously, very well that the DFS has not been used for 2 years, essentially, because it's been unaccredited. Is part of this because of that, you have to use what you got, or is it you're losing faith that DFS will actually regain accreditation?
No, I'm not losing faith, but we are recommending with this budget to change some of the structure of the work that DFS does. I'm going to ask the city administrator to explain.
I think I would frame these changes as allowing DFS to focus on their core work and getting back to accreditation for the scientific work around looking at evidence collected at crime scenes. Crime scene investigations, which is not part of the core scientific forensic lab, came from MPD to DFS a few years ago. Even since that transfer in, MPD has always had to supplement their staffing level, often with trained or reserve officers, to be able to supplement the staff available to collect crime scenes. That's going back to MPD, which is where it had been until a few years ago. And the Public Health Lab is going to be part of DC Health. This will allow the crime lab to focus squarely on getting accreditation back and being able to do the core work that's reflective of what every other forensic lab in the country does, which is the core work of testing evidence.
How does the budget help advance affordable housing goals, the 2025 mark? And I'm asking because speaking about the downtown investment with the inclusionary zoning, it seems like with the overtures being made to developers, there may not be opportunities for, to meet that goal. And I'm speaking because there were proposals made to purchase buildings to create affordable housing in those units. With that, how close are we to meeting these goals given, the situation that the budget was in?
Thank you for the question. My name is Jenny Reed, and I am Mayor Bowser's Director of the Office of Budget and Performance Management. We continue to make investments in affordable housing in this year's budget. They are not as high as we wanted them to be given the financial circumstances, but there's a new $100 million invested in the Housing Production Trust Fund. We continue investments in our local rent supplement program vouchers that are needed to make some of that housing that the Housing Production Trust Fund produces affordable to very, very low income residents. We are investing in the rehabbing of the public housing stock and making more of those units online. We are also investing as part of that housing and downtown tax abatement. There are set aside requirements for affordability at moderate income levels. We have two goals. One is to create additional 36,000 units by 2025, 12,000 of them affordable. We're about 70% of the way on the affordability goal. This will help get us a little bit further, and then we'll have to look really closely at how those different proposals to come in to know if we're going to have to extend that deadline a little bit farther out.
Follow-up question. But as far as the inclusionary zoning, isn't there some limitation with that in terms of meeting the goal? Just given the fact that some people might qualify, even though as expensive as it is to live in DC, all of us to some degree are housing insecure. So in speaking with residents in my job, sometimes, with expenses, it just doesn't quite match up, which is why I'm asking the question, because from what I understand, inclusionary zoning doesn't quite allow everybody who's housing insecure to get affordable housing.
That's true. Inclusionary zoning is one tool in our toolbox. It is not the only thing that will allow us to have more people live in the district. In part of our strategic plan, our 5-year plan, and our comeback plan, which we have dubbed it, is to focus how we increase the incomes of DC residents, especially Black Washingtonians, and that is our goal. I announced earlier that for the first time since I've been mayor, we have unemployment numbers in the district in Ward 7 and 8 that are below 2 digits. So we were over 10% unemployment in Ward 7 and 8. Definitely Ward 8, I think Ward 7 when I became mayor, and now we're below. There's really no better time to get a good paying job in Washington, D.C. And part of our focus and investments in this budget make sure we're preparing D.C. residents to do all of those things, from our investments at OSSI in the DC Futures program that allows tuition payments in high demand fields, to our investments in advanced technical centers that are preparing our DC public school students for work in our high demand field. So that we cannot forget has to be our focus on making DC more affordable for more people. We're also very focused on making sure every neighborhood in Washington, D.C. has the type of amenities to attract more D.C. residents. Keep in mind that our overarching goal is 15,000 new residents in the downtown and 25,000 more, or is it 35,000 more citywide as part of our 5-year plan. So we can continue to focus on those things.
Regarding the addition of speed cameras and, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't see where you were coming from.
No, that's okay. I should have stood. Regarding the addition of the speed cameras and the amount of money that you all expected to generate, I think $580 million annually.
Over the plan, which is 5 years.
Oh,
4 years.
4 years or 5 years? I'm sorry.
4 years.
4 years. Okay, sorry about that.
4 years.
I'm sure you hear frustration about the number of speed cameras there are already. You could interpret this as a way of you all trying to fill this shortfall by, putting that cost on the backs of commuters. What do you say to people who think we don't need more speed cameras and that this is a frustrating way to generate revenue in the District of Columbia?
Two things. What I hear most is that people are tired of reckless driving and people needlessly dying on our streets. I also hear that, Bowser, you got to do more for traffic fatalities. That's what I hear. What I know in doing this for a number of years now, that from Ward 8 to Ward 3 and every place in between, there's too much speeding and reckless driving. I also know that our ATM enforcement has shown benefits over the years that we've been involved in it. And I also know that the advance towards these deployment of speed cameras happened 2 years ago, not this year. But now we are getting to the actual deployment of those cameras, and the revenue that they generate has to be recognized. I hope we don't collect anything from the cameras, because you know what that would mean? People aren't driving recklessly, aren't running red lights, they're staying out of bus lanes, they're not running stop signs, and people can get across the district more safely. And if that is realized, then we'll also realize reductions in revenue in the remainder of the financial plan.
And just to follow up on that, I know there was a discussion of a task force and a possible kind of sliding scale. Can you just talk about that process, what that conversation's been like, what that might look like?
Sure. There are rightly questions about how ticket enforcement or ATM enforcement affects behavior, and also how flat fees affect people of different incomes differently. And quite candidly, if they affect Black and brown communities more dramatically than other communities. And so we want that task force to address those issues so that we have the most effective policies possible. Yep.
I'm going to go ask a comment up on the cameras. What a lot of people are concerned about is the enforcement. You acknowledge that 70% or 30% go unpaid of these tickets. But, you know, what we're seeing most recently is we see somebody who had $12,000, more than 40 outstanding tickets over more than a year, and there seems to have been no actions taken against that driver, and that driver killed 3 people. So that's, you know, so that's certainly not making the street safer. So what do you say, regardless of the revenue stream, just the safety component, what will you do to enforce these traffic cameras and actually collect the money and hold these people? I think you called them, I can't remember your phrase the other day when you talked about these repeat offenders, but holding them accountable rather than just allowing, particularly the out-of-state, where there's no reciprocity, to just rack up ticket after ticket after ticket with no consequences.
Mark, I think there's work to do, and I think we have to find the most effective way to do that work and enforce it, and the right people to enforce that work. And we're gonna keep working at it to do it. So, do we want people to have $12,000 worth of tickets? No. Might we have been able to put a boot on their car? Possibly. Could we have impounded their car? Possibly. Could their driver's license be revoked? You know, I don't even know all the ways that happens. But I still know that a scofflaw, which I would consider that person a reckless driver and a scofflaw, if they are intent on driving recklessly, they probably will find a way. So let's focus. We're very focused on how we are making the program work for most people, and I think 70% payment rate is not bad. But we also have to figure out how we address the scofflaws.
Mayor Bowser, your budget proposal calls for abolishing the Criminal Code Commission in fiscal 24. Can you talk about the rationale behind that?
Well, the Criminal Code Commission has finished its work and made its recommendations to the council.
Right. Is the city, wouldn't they be involved in the construction of a new criminal code proposal?
I think that remains to be determined.
Determined when?
I don't know when it's going to be determined. We recommend, and they've had many, many years of work. They made recommendations to the council. So I don't know what other work they need to do. The council and the mayor are the policymakers for the city, and so I believe that work remains among the 14 of us.
Okay, so you aren't planning the rest of this fiscal year, or even next fiscal year, to introduce a new set of proposals around this? You had introduced your own proposals to improve.
I didn't
what the
say
council
that.
did.
I said that the work of the Criminal Code Review Commission, in my view, is done. They submitted their report to the council. They were established to work on a report and a set of recommendations for the council, and they've done that.
Jumping into something that came up at the breakfast with Councilmember White and Councilmember Nadeau, the spending on ERAP, the budget is $8 million. It's, you know, it's now currently 43 or so, and it's already been spent through. You know, how do you justify that level of reduction? Kind of like, I mean, rents are still going up, people are still in need. So how is $8 million going to be sufficient given the $43 million that's already been spent for the current year?
Well, we look at the needs in the city, especially related when those increases were made to ERAP. We were in a pandemic, people were not vaccinated, there wasn't a safe and effective vaccine, and people couldn't go to work. Those circumstances have changed.
I had a question about HBTF. My understanding is that at the end of 2022, there was something like $220 million in excess revenue. You know, that was going to flow, you know, half to HBTF, half to PAYGO. Now the number you get to is $100 million for this budget. I'm just kind of curious what accounts for that difference.
Can you give me that again? And I'm going to ask Jenny to come up. I'm sorry.
No worries. HBTF.
Yes.
At the end of 2022, with the excess revenues that were certified, my understanding it was something like $220 million that would go to both HPTF and then to PAYGO. So how do we get to $100 million in this budget?
So the answer is that we utilize that surplus from FY22 to help close the gap, which is something we've done in prior years.
And just so everybody knows, we had a $1.7 billion gap to close following the February revenue estimate that the CFO delivered. All right, we'll take a couple more. Okay.
Yes, Mayor. So in the your previous presentation, you talked about non-police working in downtown DC, and I'm just curious. You talked about it quite a bit, but what are your ideas as to who would play this role? I'm just curious what the police chief might think about. What would these non-police do that would make downtown safer?
Well, what I talked about, Sam, was kind of following what I believe is the council's intent over the last several years. I have a chart. Which apparently I can't find anything this morning. But anyway, it's in here. Okay, give me 1 second. Here it is. Okay, this is our chart. And so you can see the number of sworn officers that have gone down since 2020. And that is the year we couldn't hire. So we have fewer police officers and declining. And the question was, I believe earlier, how can we get more police? How can we respond to the business community's request for more police in the downtown? And my response was, how can we have more public safety presence that doesn't include police, more police, because we just don't have the numbers to have special units. That's not to say, and I'm going to ask the chief to come up, that we don't have police presence in the downtown, because we certainly do. But to have enhanced presence, I believe that everybody plays a role, including our non-police officials in the district, like the ones that serve on our nightlife task forces, but also we have a lot of private security presence, and we have bids, which part of that private security presence, that include ambassadors. So we have a lot of people, some of them in uniform, some of them in some of our other programs or in other government agencies that are going to help enhance presence in our downtown. So if I could just have the police chief talk about deployment strategies in the downtown and working with our other partners on presence.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good afternoon. I think it's afternoon. But Sam, so to your question, you know, you've heard me talk a lot about public safety just really not being solely a police issue. It's really all hands involved in the space of public safety. And I think the mayor just hit on it a couple of seconds ago when she talked about our nightlife task force and what we believe to be really the future in this space. And it is the deployment of government resources, not just police, but as an add-on to police to get that visible presence. So for example, you know, we have ticket writers who write tickets in communities in downtown. There could be an opportunity at some point for other people, non-police people, to take non-emergency type reports, a theft report, for example. So looking really at other ways that we can increase our government footprint, but beyond the government footprint, bringing in our partners from the private sector space, ambassadors, et cetera, really folks focused in on being visible and present in these communities where we don't have the police officers. Now, to the mayor's point, do we deploy police officers to the downtown areas? And absolutely we do, but we don't have the number, I guess, that people would expect to see, as the mayor chart indicates. We don't have the officers that we had back in 2020. So what do? We don't just throw up our hands. I think this is an opportunity to look at other DC residents, potentially, to be hired in this space, to do the non-police functions. For example, we have security guards without weapons. They go and check alarms, as an example. They go and check alarms, and you know, if the door's not broken and it's something running around that caused the alarm to go off, that doesn't require a police officer to respond. So it's really just trying to think creatively, other ways that we can do business and still make sure that our communities feel safe.
Chief White, Mike.
Yeah.
Could you update us on Alabama Avenue, please?
Yeah, so we had a shooting last night around 9 o'clock, just after 9 o'clock p.m., where we had two young men, one 16, one 15, who were on a motorbike in the 2200 block of Alabama Avenue Southeast. We know so far that there were some individuals who were in a vehicle. They at some point observed these two young men on the motorbike, abruptly stopped, got out of the vehicle, fired shots, striking these two young men, unfortunately, fatally killing one of the young men. We believe that that vehicle left the scene. We believe that we've located that vehicle later on that night. It was burned at a location in the District of Columbia. So obviously, forensically, we're going through that. That's the information that we have as of this morning. Obviously, if we have any images or anything like that that we're going to release to the community, we're going through combing for video today, checking metro buses that were in the area, that kind of thing, to be able to provide any video that might be helpful in this investigation. Unfortunately, we don't know what the motive is, why someone would choose that time of the evening to shoot these two young men, but it's part of the investigation. So our homicide guys are working on it.
Was there an exchange of gunfire?
I don't believe it was an exchange. Again, this is very preliminary, Mark, but as of this morning, I don't believe that there was an exchange of gunfire, or definitely not from the young men who were shot.
Do you know were they targeted, the two on the motor?
Oh, we definitely believe that the two young men were targeted, and that's very unfortunate.
I have a budget question for the chief. Hi.
Hi.
Wondering, I heard that you got all of your staffing needs met. What does that mean from a numbers standpoint? And can you explain if any of your requests were based on the fact that you are now helping out Metro with security?
Well, it has nothing to do with Metro, but you know we have had very intense discussions about what the hiring projection, what does it look like, a realistic projection of what we can bring into the door and have ultimately these officers on the streets of the District of Columbia. So we wanted to be realistic in that space, continue to focus on our police cadet program as a pipeline. I'm very happy with what I'm seeing there. We have over 125 DC residents, the majority from Ward 7 and 8, kids that are in our police cadet pipeline that ultimately will become police officers here in the District of Columbia. So, you know, as the mayor mentioned, here's her chart. I mean, this is a real number, and you know, while we have people who, we want police presence. I was at a community meeting last night. I was at the Restaurant Association yesterday talking with folks, and they certainly want to see the police presence, but we want to be very realistic about what that will look like as we move into the future.
Off-topic question for the chief.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's the conversation around police training to prevent situations where arrests don't lead to convictions?
The conversation around police training, well, there's a lot of things that go into that. It's not just about police training. Sometimes it's, for example, you have a person who gets robbed right outside of the library by a guy who's masked up with a COVID mask, and the witness can't identify him. That doesn't have anything to do with police training. We just have a person who's unable to identify who the suspect is in that case. So while we may make an arrest in that case, and the case doesn't get prosecuted, again, nothing to do with police training. It's really just the facts of the case. If you're talking like specifically about something like, for example, around a Fourth Amendment issue or something, like an officer, his search was not the best search, or the prosecutors don't want to move forward with a case because of a search or something like that. Those are things that we constantly train on. We work with our partners at the OAG's office, at the U.S. Attorney's office, to identify in our monthly meetings. Matter of fact, I think I have a meeting with the USAO today and his team to identify any issues in any spaces that adversely impact cases, to take those things back to train our officers on. So that's a constant thing that we're doing. But I would not, I think it would be an error to narrowly focus on police training or some issue with police training to say that's why cases are not being prosecuted. Yep.
Follow-up question?
Sure.
What's the status of the investigation involving Delaney O'Martin?
Who? Which one? Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. I thought you were talking about another. Okay. So obviously, that just happened over the weekend. MPD, Internal Affairs, we're investigating that case. It's unfortunately someone lost their life, but as we do in any case involving the use of force by a law enforcement officer in the District of Columbia, the Metropolitan Police Department has primary jurisdiction and authority over that investigation. Once we complete our preliminary findings, that information will then be passed along to the United States Attorney's Office, where ultimately a decision will be made about whether or not the shooting was justified, not justified, legal, lawful, unlawful, and then we would go from there. But right now, our team is still gathering information from the weekend, and then that information will be submitted to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
And the status of the officer that went in the back seat of the car?
It's it was a U.S. Park Police officer. Last I heard, it was he may have been treated for some injuries and released or something, but I'm not sure what his duty status is. Thank you.
Okay. Off topic, if it's a legal question, we'll reset for those later. Off topic on anything else? You have an on topic, Martin?
Yeah.
Okay, I see you shaking your head, so I'm not sure where you want to go with that. Go ahead.
On the budget. So you heard, again, some council members concerned about this $578 million of revenue expected revenue from the traffic cameras, the fact that you guys are proposing a change to the law so it no longer goes just to Vision Zero projects. Let's say the council decides that they want it all to go to Vision Zero projects. How does that impact the rest of the budget? Like, what's the impact?
About $578 million, less the other investments that we already have in Vision Zero. Does that answer your question? So this is how it works, and I'm going to use this as a quick primer on how the budget works. We, based on the CFO's revenue estimates and on our own costs, we propose a balanced budget to the council. That is my charter authority. The council then has 70 days by statute. They will hold public hearings, and they have the charter authority to approve or amend my proposal. So that's the stage that we're in now. And every year there's some changes. And the thing that I hope that you recognize from our proposal is we're focused on the fiscal stability of the district, and we think that we have made very sound approaches to help bring us out of the pandemic, to grow our population, to invest in our people, and to continue to attract businesses and residents to the district. That's the long-term stability. We've had to make some tough choices here. They impact vacant positions. They impact what we think are some programs and services that have been underperforming, and redirects those programs and services. We continue to make very robust investments in our facilities, which we know have been a part of the 15-year renaissance of Washington, D.C., and we know it's important to continue to make those investments in schools, in parks and recreation, in new parks, in services, and also in new destinations and activities that will allow us to recreate the vibrancy of our city. We also have a focus on the basics, and this is a message that my cabinet wants me to deliver loud and clear. We have to be good at the basics. And so some of the emphasis that you saw on facilities, what we call small capital repairs, is making sure that we have what we need in terms of our buildings and our ability to make sure that we're delivering for the people of the District of Columbia. What you will also see is from us scant new spending proposals. So we've had to true up because of inflation some programs that I committed to, or the council is committed to make sure we can deliver them, but we have very few things that are new. One of them is my after-school DC that will allow us to really focus on our parents and families in DC, which are going to be a huge part of how we grow our population. And so one of those programs is My After School DC. We also expand the eligibility for a child care subsidy, which will allow more than 2,000 more DC families to qualify for subsidized child care. So those things are hugely important to how we grow. So the figure that you referred to, Martin, is part of other looks across our budget to make sure we're balancing, but not having to cut deep into the programs and services that everyone cares about. Thank you, everybody.
I'm sorry, Mayor, I
Yep.
have one question off topic. Getting to the deputy mayor, the former deputy mayor.
We're going to handle those later. I'm going to come back to the podium.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah, we'll reset and handle those in a minute. All right, thank you, everybody.